Hey guys, Bart from TST Industries here. Today I'm bringing you a very special episode of TST Garage. We are getting ready to launch our brand new second generation Grom Undertail and integrated tail light combo. And in the studio I have two second generation Groms, one of which has a bone stock tail end. We will show you how to install all the components of this kit on the bike and break it down for you into little steps. Before I do that, I'm going to go through all the different separate components that make this kit to explain to you how this works, and then we'll get into the installation portion and we'll have some fun. All right, so first and foremost, I want to introduce you guys to the base component of the kit, and that is the undertail. We spent an insane amount of time developing this part, designing it, and designing the tooling that ultimately makes this part. The result is something I'm really proud of. The lines really followed the lines of the bike. It looks really tacky and really completes the rear end. And also it is color matched and texture matched to the rest of the components that envelop the area that this goes in. Now the inside of our undertail features a lot of this geometry that enables the mounting of our integrated tail light. These tail lights, being integrated, have the brake and the running light functions and also left and right signal right in one capsule. They are available in a choice of clear or smoked lens, and for this kit they are plug and play. You have a sub harness that goes with the tail light. It is included in your kit, and it has all the OEM connectors to make a plug and play connection on the bike during the installation. These taillights come with load balancing resistors. As some of you may know, when you go from incandescent OEM lights for signaling on a bike to any LED type equipment for signaling, it'll start flashing fast, something commonly called hyperflash. So most guys will wire these resistors in parallel with each signaling circuit, and that will increase the current draw in the system and thereby slow down the flash rate. If you don't want to wire anything like that in, we do have a separate component. It's our Gen 2F flasher relay. This is plug and play. Most of you guys that know about us already know about these components. They sell very well, and most guys prefer those to wiring in some floppy heated elements that end up somewhere in your trunk heating up, and they pose a challenge being installed. So we recommend the relay. If you don't want the relay, our resistors come by default with all of these lights. Now the last component I want to talk about in the base kit is our relocation bracket for your tip sensor. So for this installation, you will need to move your tip sensor from the rear of the bike more forward, and then bend back the bracket that mounts your tip sensor. We've made this bracket with all the hardware necessary. It is included in the kit. We'll show you how to install that. So this, what I just explained, encompasses all of the parameters of your tail light and also your undertail. Now, where do you mount your license plate? If you guys already have some sort of a license plate set up that you like and it's mounted not on the tail of the bike, then you can just simply get the kit that I just explained and you're good to go. If you want to include a license plate bracket on your kit, we have two options. One that will sit on an angle deeper in under the tail, and then we also have a kit that will sit more towards the rear under the tail light, and it will be more perpendicular to the ground. So the choice is yours. On our website we will have the options for you. You can choose whichever one works better for you. And we also recommend buying the Stealth license plate light. This kit will not come with a license plate light by default because some guys don't want to run a license plate light, and we don't make you pay for something that you're not going to use. So if you do intend to use a license plate light, these are nice and simple. We'll also show you how to plug it in and install it. We'll go through those steps at the end of the video. So I think I've done a pretty good job explaining to you what all the components are, how they interact, and now we're going to jump into the installation. Let's have some fun. All right, So in step one, we will remove the license plate off the bike and retain the hardware so that we could remount the license plate on our new setup. In the next step, we will remove the seat, put that to the side, and then we could proceed to the following steps. Okay, so let's now remove these two Phillips head fasteners, one on either side of the bike. And after this step, we'll jump up top and start removing some of the hardware up here. In this next step, we will be removing these two fasteners. They are a 10mm head. And now back to our Phillips for these two in the back here. And now we will push this friction fastener and this friction fastener out. And I believe this whole part is now free to come out. That's right. Put that to the side and move on. Now, starting at the rear of the bike, we will need to remove all the wiring out of the routing guides here. This just came apart on me, but usually requires pushing it in opposite directions. And just take the wires out. All right. Now there's a bendable metal routing guide here. And as we move forward, we're going to find this plug under a boot. These are all the signal and license plate-like functions that come off with the fender. So we will press this tab, withdraw the plug, and that's ready. Now under here, there's a plug that looks exactly like this, but black. It has a little tab here that hooks it onto a tab that's on the frame. So what we'll do is use a small flathead, pull up on it, and that will release it. Now that gives us access to this plug. As you can see, it's the same thing as I showed you, just black. And now, the plug itself has a tab that locks it in place. So we'll need to lift it up and unplug it. This tab gets lifted up towards the exterior of the body of the plug, and that releases the plug, leaves this male plug behind, and these two are what we're going to be plugging into when we have everything installed and ready to plug our new equipment in. Now, this wire here is the wire that goes to your tip sensor in the back. Since we're working on wires right now, we might as well just unplug that right away. This particular plug has a area where you press, and that unlocks this forward portion, and you just withdraw it. So now we'll just leave that here for now. We'll revisit it later when it's time to route it towards the inside here. Our new location for the tip sensor will be in this compartment. So now we can actually remove the tail light, and it is held on by two 10mm nuts. Also two washers. Once those come off, tail light will just wiggle out towards the rear. And now we can put that to the side and proceed to the removal of the actual fender. For this next step, I've switched my tool over to a 12mm socket, and I will be removing these 4 fasteners. Those screws go right into the fender. Once they're out, the fender's released. As I do this, I support the fender from the bottom with my hand. That way it doesn't just drop and yank all these wires through, possibly whip me in the face as it comes out. Now, a little nudge towards the rear of the bike to unlock this component here, and then keep removing it towards the rear because there are tabs up here that engage with sliding lock features on the bottom. Milk out the harness, and now we're rid of this behemoth. So in the rear portion here, we've removed these Phillips head screws, and those were screwed into these press-on tabs here. We're going to remove these tabs because they are going to be reused on our TST Industries setup. They just slide up towards the rear. So I have a void in the middle, and on our setup, they get pressed on this feature from the side, and you just have to make sure that the threaded portion, whole boss sticking out, goes on the bottom. Okay, and that looks good. That looks pretty good, but I didn't get a concentric yet, so I'm gonna work it just a little bit more. And now we have a straight shot through the top into the threaded portion, and we are good to go on this. So now I'm going to talk about cutting off this portion. Obviously, when you replace this whole setup with a sleek setup that follows the lines of the bike, this bump will have to be removed. The equipment underneath this bump is just the tip sensor. Tip sensor tells the bike's falling over, it shuts it off. You guys get the point. That will need to be relocated, so we will need to gain access underneath here to actually unscrew it and move it forward. To do that, I'm going to use a blade. This is possible using some other types of tools, but I found that the blade is very precise and it lets me make a small notch around the whole thing, then puncture through and remove this thing pretty easily and in a very neat fashion. After that comes off, we'll slice the rest of it off once our tip sensor is out. Now, I've just talked about a lot of cutting that needs to happen here. Some of you guys may be a little apprehensive or nervous about cutting up a brand new bike that you just paid a lot of money for. So I'm going to say this. This is a brand new Honda OEM part. It's the entire Undertail. It's the part that you will be modifying. If for some reason you guys want to return this bike to stock after you've ran around with this setup for a while, or you're nervous about modifying it wrong and needing another one, we will sell you one of these for 15 bucks. I typically don't get nervous over 15 bucks, especially in light of how awesome this whole thing is going to come together and look and clean up the rear end. So I hope you guys don't get nervous about that. And if you do, just know that we're here to support you in the event that you screw this up or want to return to stock. All right, so now let's get our eye protection on, get a blade, and let's start cutting. All right, so what I'm doing here is basically starting a notch around where the bump surface meets the flat surface here, and I'm going to carry that around the entire perimeter of this feature. Key to success here is to not dig too deep. Just go a little bit at a time, and the little slit that you make with the blade will become deeper and deeper and ultimately puncture through. And there we go. All right, this is your tip sensor. Two 10mm screws will get it out. I'll swap over to my 10mm socket and remove that. All right, so So now that's out. Save these parts. I will show you how to remount all of this later. And at this point, we will need to get rid of the rest of this. For that, I like to use a hacksaw. You could continue using the blade. I just feel like a hacksaw will be a little bit easier. I use blue tape to mark my cut. All right, so I will mark this. The blue tape will mark everything that we need to take off. This is basically marked at the very, very trailing edge of our subframe. All right, so all the metal components end here, and the blue tape marks off all the plastic components that protrude beyond all the metal, and this is what we will be cutting off with our hacksaw. All right, so we're going to go with eye protection again, and my weapon of choice here is a hacksaw. I'm going to align it with my blue surface, between my blue surface and the metal component here, and start cutting. When I cut plastic, or anything for that matter, I really like to let the blade do the work, and I don't force anything. I don't press on it too much. This results in a much better cut, and it doesn't flex any of the plastic or stress any of the components. All right, so I got through the right side. Now I'm going to do the left side in the same fashion. And goodbye. So now I'm going to grab a file and just go over my cut. Just make it nice and neat. Try not to remove any of the paint off the subframe. It is steel and it will rust. You can also run a blade along the edges. Now this isn't really visible when everything's put together, but I like to have my installations look nice and neat inside and out, and that's why I go through this extra step. That looks pretty good on that side. All right. Now, as you can see, the bracket that's welded into the frame here is still protruding below the surface that our undertail will be mounting to. Let's grab the undertail and verify that. Yeah, so it still impedes our ability to mount this on. So notice with some other kits, other undertail kits that I have seen other companies come out with, they require you to cut this off. For our installation, we will not be cutting it off, and that will make returning this setup to the OEM spec really easy. Instead of cutting, we'll just bend it. And if you ever want to return it to your stock configuration, it'll basically just be unbending this bracket. So one thing I do have to note here is that you have to make sure that you don't bend it too far, because then it will get in the way of the spring that controls the force to spring back your trunk lock or your seat lock. And I got it below the surface and just about to touch the spring, but with enough clearance so that now we have a perfect match here, and we'll be able to install this with no issues. All right, so let's go on to the next step. Now I'm going to grab the tip sensor wire that ran and plugged into the tip sensor here and reroute it so we have it under this tube ready to plug in here. This whole wire harness gets out of the way here, and there's a little void underneath this frame component here, and we just push this all the way to the inside, and now we have it routed in here. We only need a little bit of length here, so I'm going to keep it this long and then pull it back in and get it situated in these routing clips and get it tied down. Now we'll have to prep this surface with a little bit of alcohol. I'm using denatured. You can use isopropyl or some other degreaser. We're going to stick the bracket on before we screw it in. So I like to keep the surface that the tape adheres to nice and clean. In our kit here, there will be hardware and the bracket. We'll go over the hardware later. Let's just take the masking off the tape and expose the adhesive. All right, so you can notice here, there's a notch that accepts this geometry in the sub tray, so it's very easy to locate. Go in on an angle, butt up against it, and then press it against this piece. So again, into the corner and press the adhesive into the plastic. Now it's ready to go. Okay, so now I'm going to drill 2 pilot holes. I'm using a 1/8 inch drill bit. This will serve as a nice pilot hole for our screws that mount this bracket to the sub tray. Those 2 screws come out of the kit that I just unpackaged, and they are self-threading. So we will need a Phillips screwdriver, and those will create their own thread as they go in. Before I tighten those up, I like to engage the thread on both sides. And then you could go to full tightness at this point. Blow any burrs out of the way. And now our tip sensor will be able to be screwed into that. Now on the tip sensor, well, we removed it. We took the screws that originally held it in place, and we took those with the assembly. So those will actually fit into the bracket. So I'll show you guys off the bike. Those screws through the tip sensor, through here, and on the other side, we provided you in the bracket kit with locking nuts. Both of these fasteners use a 10mm head, so you can use an open-ended wrench or a ratcheting box wrench, and that will be the method for our assembly here. I typically like to go one side at a time. I'm going to use these long needle nose pliers to start the thread. There's not a lot of room behind there. Once I start the thread, I will revert to my wrenches. I'm going to do this on both sides before we move forward. Oh, that will not work. My ratcheting box wrench is just a little bit too big, so I'm going to employ my handy ratchet handle here. A little bit of a cumbersome fit, but if we move some of these wires out of the way, it gets better. All right, so let's plug this thing in and pull back on the wire a little bit. Make sure it's nice and neat in here, and rearrange these wires to the way they were. I like to leave this area as it was before. Now, as you notice, this tip sensor is on an angle. We've tested it for a long time in this orientation. It doesn't cause any problems. The bike doesn't shut off on you. We've gone off-road, we've done a bunch of stuff. But if you're worried about that and you feel like it should be upright, then you could just bend this bracket back and you could get it vertical. Choice is yours. I opt for the simpler solution. All right, so now this is done and we could start reassembling everything with the rest of our components and get that nice result. So in a previous step, I showed you guys how to reconfigure the fastening components onto the undertail already, so they will already be assembled here. Right now, we will take some of the hardware from the kit and get the undertail fastened to the bottom of the bike. Now these 4 holes for the fasteners line up with the factory holes here. It's pretty easy to see where everything goes. I'm going to take 4 of these screws one at a time and get them through the bottom. Drop one of these washers on top and engage the thread with one of our nylock nuts, and we will go around and get those into all the 4 holes that are in there. All right, and now I'm going to use a 10mm socket from the top side to hold these nuts in place, and a 4mm Allen from the bottom. I'm just going to snug them up a little bit, almost bottom them out, but leave adjustability in the system. All right. The whole undertail is still able to be moved and adjusted into place, so we're good here. We're going to go ahead and pre-configure our tail light. The tail light comes with a 6-position plug. It requires the sub harness that we send with the kit. You just need to plug it in. It's keyed. There's only one way for it to go. Now I'm going to insert the tail light with the longer portion towards the top, through the window in the back of the undertail, and then get it down on the slots on the back here. So this grommet bottoms out in its slot. Now we have 3 slots. You see the holes right behind them that will receive the 3 remaining self-threading screws from the kit. Like always, I get the threads engaged, but don't bottom them out. Once I have all these 3 holes, 3 threads started, I'm going to press down here to bottom out in those slots and make sure that it's level, and then go all the way to bottom. And you don't have to exert a lot of force on these connections. If you do, you will either strip the threads you just formed in the bosses inside the taillight, or you will deform the plastic here. You have 3 screws that exert enough pressure on here, and then also captive geometry around the lens. This will not move on you. And now we can route our wire around all of these components through the original routing guides and clips. As you can see with this sub harness, we'll just be plugging right into all the OEM plugs. So there's no stress there. Just click and go. So that's your main functions, running and brake light. And this is your signals right here. And if you remember, this plug came off of a tab down here, so I'm going to replace it on there. And then just hide all these wires down here. Get it under this metal clamp and bend it down. And now our wiring is nicely out of the way. It's not going to snag anything here. Under all these surfaces, boom, we're good here. All right, so now before I go any further, I'm going to test the functions here. Everything looks good. As you can see on this particular bike, we've already installed one of these Gen 2F flasher relays. So the flash rate is correct. Typically, when you replace the OEM signals, it'll flash really fast. And that's why we make these. So we have a separate video for this if you guys are interested that is accessible through our website, tstindustries.com, or our YouTube channel. All right, so now we are ready to go to the next phase here, and that will be reinstalling the OEM tail components, and then we will get all the fasteners in, tighten them down, and this setup will be ready to go. So the reinstallation of all these components here, they're actually all in one chunk, will be roughly the reverse order of disassembly. Just carefully get them over all the accepting features. And a good indicator of being far enough forward is that the two friction fasteners that are here and here that you saw me disassemble, or rather take out during our disassembly, when they are aligned with their accepting features, that is an indicator that this is good to go. And as you can see, all of these components fit around the tabs that are on our undertail. So now we are ready to go. If for some reason you see the tabs stick out like so, you will need to stretch this open and get it around. And the tab runs roughly all around the undertail. So you just have to get it, fit it all around, and then we could proceed to the reassembly of some of the screws. Now these 10mm shoulder screws, you see here, those were the ones that we took out from the top here. It's the painted surface into the subframe connection. And as you tighten them down, you want to wiggle them around so that the shoulder actually penetrates into the tab on the painted part before you tighten it down. If you clamp the painted surface with that shoulder, you're going to deform it, and that's just not good. Typically, I keep some adjustability here in the system so that I could tweak it around. Sometimes we'll see a little bit too much gap on one side or the other. So that's why I leave adjustability, so I could clamp it in place with my hands and then tighten down so we get a proper engagement everywhere. All right, so we had these screws, the Phillips heads, also with shoulders that go into those accepting features on our undertail that we slid the clips over. And that's pretty straightforward. You just have to align them, thread them in, and then you're good to go. Again, want to leave a little bit of adjustability. Okay, I think we are 2 screws away from being pretty much done. These are the smaller shoulder Phillips screws that go underneath here. And those you could get to full tightness right away. I just press on this surface towards the inside, and then I tighten it down. All right, so now everything's looking pretty good here. I'm going to tighten up these 4 screws, and they are countersunk. So that means they will align themselves in their proper positions. Just I like to pull it back as far as it'll go to close up the top gap here. All right, so a little recommendation here. We do have spacers built into our undertail, and they are made of plastic. We've also equipped you with nylock locking nuts that go on top of all these. What you want to do is bottom out the locking nut and then give it a quarter turn, and that will be sufficient. You just don't want this to vibrate, but you also don't want to smush it, because then you'll deform this component or crack it. Yeah, it's going to be a bad day. All right, 2 more screws to go, and we should be ready to go here. Just going to tighten up on the side screws here that go into those threaded features that slid over our undertail side wings. And I think I am pretty much done here with this configuration. I'll show it to you guys with the seat on. There we go. All right, so you have your running light, brake light, left signal, right signal. Everything seems to be working right. So now you're styling. This installation is complete, but this was just a basic undertail and taillight installation. In the next 2 segments, we will show you how to install our low mount and our standard location mount, license plate bracket, and we will also be shooting a follow-up video that will show you how to install one of our Elite 1 adjustable fender eliminators that enable adjustability of the angle and also have a really nice anodized finish on CNC machined aluminum parts and all stainless steel hardware. So look for that video soon. That's soon to follow, and then hang out. We'll see you in the next 2 segments.